Well, welcome back, everybody, and today we're going to be in Chapter 3, which deals with theory building. Today we're going to take a look at some of the concepts that surround theory, some of the things that we can use in social media as far as social media theory, and we're going to take a look at some other concepts that involve this next step in business research. Okay, everyone, welcome back, and we are beginning Chapter 3 now, which is theory building. Now, what's a theory? Well, a theory is as many people believe, an educated guess. It is a concept, an idea that you may have that may be built off experience, or maybe you believe something to be, and from that you start to think about the possibilities of what those thoughts and ideas may come to, or what may be the cause of events and so forth. These are all ideas that surround theory. So let's talk today about theory. Today we're going to define the meaning of it. We're going to understand the goals of theory. We're going to understand the terms and concepts, the propositions, the variables, and the hypotheses, and discuss how theories are developed, and then finally understand the scientific method. Now, theory and practice. If you remember, just a minute ago I said sometimes we build theories off of our prior experiences and so forth. So let's expound on that a little bit. Here you see a situation where the light didn't come on when you flipped the switch. Now, you're going to seek, as you see here in the slide, a logical explanation for that. Now, past experience would guide your thoughts. What would be the first thing that came to mind? Well, maybe the light bulb has blown. That would be my first inclination. But what if you put a new light bulb in and it still didn't turn on? Well, then you might want to see if it's plugged in. So past experiences, based on what you have come into contact with, will help guide your thinking and come to solutions. And then from your past experiences, you make attributions. And attribution theory is something that is the framework that helps explain the world. The light bulb didn't come on. Well, you attribute that to a faulty light bulb. Or if the light bulb was changed and didn't come on, you attribute it maybe to a bad wire, or maybe the plug being unplugged. So from our experiences, we experience the world and we make attributions based on our prior experiences of events that have taken place in our world. Now, what is theory? Well, theory is a formal, logical explanation of some events that includes predictions on how things relate to one another. So again, your theory about the light bulb. You take a lamp that doesn't work, and you take a light bulb that you think may be the cause, and you relate them to one another. Hey, the problem is probably the light bulb. Now, we have goals when it comes to theory, and those goals are to understand. In science and in business, we want to understand the nature of what we do. Let's say, for instance, we have, as we've used before, a 30% decrease in sales. Well, we want to understand why we have that decrease in sales. So our theory might be that we have a defect in the product, or the economy may be bad, or whatever. So theories help us to understand what's going on. But also we can use theories to predict. I predict that if we increase our marketing efforts, that we will see a 30% increase in sales. So it works both ways, and theories help us to understand, as you see, and to predict. Now, concepts. Concepts are what we call constructs. Constructs are those things that we can talk about, but we really can't see from a tangible sense. For instance, I can talk to you about happiness, but what is happiness? Happiness is a construct. I can see the effects of it when someone laughs or smiles, but how do I know what happiness is? So when we're looking at concepts, we're thinking about things that are generalized ideas about attributes and occurrences and processes. And you see some examples here: leadership, morale. You've seen evidence of it, but how do you tangibly measure and experience these things? I can't measure morale as far as holding it and putting a tape measure on it. I might can measure the effects of it by talking to people who have high or low morale, but that's about the extent of it. Now, your book talks about social network theory, how it came to being with nodes, which are individuals and organizations, and how they come together. And from that, they've been able to kind of devise theories on how people come together, how societies and people form links and so forth. So this would be a construct or a concept theory. And now we have the ladder of abstraction. The ladder of abstraction talks about how things progress from the concrete at the lowest to the higher levels, which are more conceptual. At the top here, you see the definition. It's the organization of concepts in sequence from the most concrete to the most general. At the abstract level, that's the level of knowledge expressing a concept that exists only as an idea or a quality apart from an object. The empirical level, the level of knowledge that is verifiable by experience or observation. And then the latent construct, which is a concept that is directly or not directly observable or measurable, but can be estimated through proxy measures. Now, this next slide gives you an idea of what it is. At the bottom, you have reality. Now, the reality may be the punch press, which is something that is tangible. I can see that. I can measure it. I can hold it in my hand. Well, maybe not all of it, but I can touch it and feel it and experience it tangibly. But if I go higher, then I'm talking about maybe the punch press as being a part of plant machinery. Now you see my concept got broader. I'm no longer looking at maybe just the punch press. I'm looking now at the punch press as part of plant machinery, which broadens the scope of what I'm thinking about. And then plant machinery can be broadened to be assets. What are assets? Well, assets can be anything within that plant. So you see how the ladder of abstraction for concepts grows from the reality, which is at the base level, all the way to the abstract, which is assets. And it gets a little bit more difficult to visualize, and you have a lot more freedom, even though it may be a little bit more difficult to visualize one thing. Now you're having to look at that punch press in light of just being an asset, which lumps it into many, many different things that can help the organization. Now, concepts are abstractions of reality, and here you see from the slide, you have an abstract level and an empirical level. An empirical level is something that we derive, a reality that we derive because we have tested it or researched it based on variables that exist. But the abstract, well, let's take a look at the empirical level. Number of sales calls, number of sales, dollar value of sales. Now, I can evaluate a salesperson based on the empirical, which is the number of calls and sales and dollar values. But as I go higher into a more abstract assessment of that salesperson, I'm looking at job performance. I'm looking at the salesperson, his or herself. So I become more broad and more abstract as I'm looking at a person. And that's what you have to do too. You have to take the empirical, the things that you can measure, that you can see, and also from that, you have to look at the person on another level too, which is the person as a whole, performance and so forth. Now, propositions are just statements explaining the linkage among certain concepts, and you're looking at universal connections between concepts as well. For example, treating employees better will make them more loyal employees. Well, that's a proposition. You can argue for or against it, but you are just making a statement about linking two different things: treating employees well and them working more loyally. A hypothesis is a formal statement of an unproven proposition that is empirically testable. And that's where you start to be able to open yourself up to verifying your proposition. Here, the example would be giving employees one Friday off each month will result in lower employee turnover. So these are things that you can measure. You're still linking two things, time off and turnover, but now you can measure that. Empirical testing, as we said, is examining a research hypothesis against reality using data. And for instance, if you want to be able to say that morale is higher when I give them Fridays off, you can start giving them Fridays off, measure the results of that, and then you can, if morale is higher, then you have something, a proposition that is true, and you can depend on that. Now, variables are anything that may assume different numerical values. A variable would be the time off. A variable would be increasing their workload, or whatever. It's anything that can come in and affect your proposition or your hypothesis. Operationalizing is a process of identifying the actual measurement scales to assess the variables of interest. And you see here the difference between a hypothesis and a proposition. At the abstract level, treat employees better, you'll get more loyal employees. Well, you don't know if you will or not. I know some companies that treat their people better, but their pay is bad, so they're not going to be as loyal to that company. But the hypothesis is more it's more succinct, it's more objective, and you can measure it. Increase retirement benefits by 5%. That will reduce annual turnover. These are things that you can measure. You have quantifiable data or variables here that you can assess empirically to come to conclusions. And this is basic theory explaining voluntary job turnover. As you can see, job performance and all the things that could affect it, variables, and then you go to intention to quit and then voluntary turnover on the individual's volition. So you've got different kind of areas and variables that can come into play that could explain or disprove or prove whether or not people are going to be leaving that company. Now, deductive and inductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is the logical process of deriving a conclusion about a specific instance based on a known general premise or something known to be true. So you're taking a broad condition and you are deducing from that broad variable to something that you can make a finite statement about. Let me give you an example here. Sherlock Holmes used to solve crimes through deductive reasoning. He would take a look at clues, and from all of those clues, he would be able to whittle down to the perpetrator of the crime. That's deductive reasoning. Let's say, for instance, you have a flat tire and you start to backtrack. Well, the flat tire was caused by running over a nail. Well, how do you know that? Well, you can start backtracking. I was on the interstate and there was road construction there, and they were working with material on the side of the road, putting up a rail maybe. And I remember going over that section, and I could see tools and nails and all of that going spread out on the side of the road. And then you didn't go anywhere else. You went straight home, and then you parked the car, and you could go out and you could see maybe a nail print or nail. Then you can deduce that you got that flat tire from that scene there on the construction site of the highway. That's deductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning would be to make a broad generalization from a particular fact or instance. Let's say you were taking a test and you didn't study and you failed the test. Well, inductive reasoning would say, if I don't study for tests, then I'm going to fail them all. And that would probably be true, but that's inductive reasoning, where you take a one particular instance and you make a broad general statement from that instance. And that would be an example of that. Now, the scientific method is something that we talked about last week. It's a set of prescribed procedures for establishing and connecting theoretical statements about events, for analyzing empirical evidence, and for predicting events yet unknown. They're techniques or procedures used to analyze empirical evidence in an attempt to confirm or disprove prior conceptions. This is what you're going to be doing in business, or you can do it in ministry. It makes no difference. You have a theory about something, or you have a hypothesis. Well, the scientific method would be to go and test it, which means to collect data, and then once the data are brought in, you analyze the data, and then from there you make conclusions. Now, they give you the suggested steps here. Assess the relevant existing knowledge of phenomenon, formulate concepts and propositions, state your hypothesis, design research to test the hypothesis, acquire empirical data, analyze and evaluate the data, and then propose an explanation of the phenomenon and state new problems raised by the research. So, coming up with solutions, being an effective decision maker, these things aren't just restricted to special people. All new discoveries, coming to make good decisions when there are times of doubt. All of these things come from the scientific method. In fact, I believe the Bible, as we consider, God's word in light of what we're studying here. Jesus didn't just go out on a whim with anything. Jesus could back up everything that he said. You remember when he talked to the Pharisees, he would use empirical data. The law says this, or the law says that. And from there, Jesus could argue, there is a new way, though. and he would show them. So this is how discovery takes place. And it's good for you to exercise that, to get in the habit of doing that. Don't take things at face value. Test always what you're being told or what you experience. And if you can harbor that, you'll be well on your way to a better and effective leader, whether it's in business or in ministry. Well, today we took a look at several concepts that deal with research. As you see, we saw the idea of theory. We saw the idea of concepts. We also took a look at the scientific method a little bit more in detail. All of these things are necessary if you're going to be able to collect accurate and pertinent data to be able to make effective decisions in business or in ministry. Well, that's all we have today. Have a good day, and we'll resume tomorrow.